Friends, Not Masters. A Political Autobiography. Mohammad Ayub Khan, President of Pakistan. Published in 1967. This is a Plisken audiobook presentation dedicated to those who have worked for the building of Pakistan as a progressive and modern state, and to those who have defended it with such distinction. Chapter 3. The Army. 1948 to 1950. I was commanding the Gardai Brigade in Waziristan in January 1948, when I was ordered to proceed to East Pakistan to serve as General Officer Commanding. I could not say that I was excited at the prospect. I had never liked the climate of that area, and there were certain personal problems such as finding accommodation for my family in Rawalpindi, so that the children might continue their studies. The army could not help in the matter, and I was forced to leave my family in the annex of a building, which was really used as servants' quarters. Having lodged them there, I packed a couple of suitcases and left for East Pakistan. It was a difficult and trying time for the country, and an exacting assignment. I spent nearly 2 years in East Pakistan. The provincial government, with which I came in frequent contact, was newly formed and poorly staffed. But worse still, it was politically weak and unstable. There was no army. All we had in East Pakistan at the time of independence were 2 infantry battalions. One of these had 3 Muslim companies, the 4th, a Hindu company, having been transferred to India. The other battalion had 1 Sikh company and 1 Dogra company, leaving us with only 2 more Muslim companies. We had very poor accommodation. At headquarters there was no table, no chair, no stationery. We had virtually nothing at all, not even any maps of East Pakistan. Gradually we started to organize ourselves. Around Tegon and Komitola airfields there were some thatched huts built during the Second World War. There was hardly any place for officers, and we had to improvise some kind of accommodation for them. They lived in baskers, which were often in a poor state and leaked almost incessantly during the heavy rains. It was not uncommon for men to keep shifting their charpoys at night to some dry spot under the roof. During the nor'westers, the basher roof was sometimes blown off, leaving the man high but not dry. In the morning he had to go and look for his basher and bring it back in bits and pieces. Gradually the position improved. Plans were laid for building permanent accommodation for a brigade group. It was necessary to locate some units near Dhaka so that they might be available to act in support of the civil authority. Other sites were also planned. The difficulty was to find high ground which would not go underwater during the monsoons. After much searching over the whole province I was able to locate 2 areas, and General Headquarters approved them. We built 1 cantonment near Dhaka, and the other on high ground near Camilla. Both these have since developed into established picturesque sites. The signs were far from propitious. Our borders were under a constant threat from India, and soon we were embroiled in fighting with her in Kashmir. As a result, it was difficult to get any reinforcements to strengthen our position in East Pakistan. The province was in an extremely underdeveloped state. Nothing had been done for it before partition, though there were great opportunities for industrialization and enterprise. The Muslims did not have the capital, and the jute trade, worth about 900 million rupees a year, was in the hands of Hindu Marwaris, who repatriated all their profits to India. The only good stretch of surfaced road that existed, to my knowledge, was somewhere in Pabna district, covering a distance of about 30 miles. Then there was a bit of road going from Jessore to the north, and a so-called road from the airfields around Dhaka going to Narayanganj. Except for these, there were no roads in the province worth the name. River communication was of course available, but it was slow and inadequate. There was a good railway, but it had taken such a beating during the war, that the rolling stock was completely worn out, and required immediate replacement. I used to consider it a great pity that Calcutta should have been developed on the raw materials produced in East Pakistan, and that no processing plant or factory should have been put up in any part of the province. The fault lay with us, since even before independence the Muslims of the province had been fairly vocal in politics, and had produced men like Fazlul Haq, Surawadi, and Khawaja Nazimuddin, who were associated with the government in one capacity or another. All of them had been chief ministers of undivided Bengal, but they had been unable to do anything for their people. It must be admitted that the task was stupendous. Khawaja Nazimuddin was the chief minister of the province when I went there as GOC. He was a pious man with a long political record, but it was a torture for him to give a decision. I saw him in his office many times. I would see an impressive head behind a pile of papers which covered him up to the nose. It was commonly believed that the chief minister had a method of his own to deal with problems. Any file requiring a decision was quietly pushed under the pile, and there it remained till with the passage of time the problem solved itself. I also met Nurul Amin and Hamidul Haq Chowdhury in those days. Chowdhury was then finance minister in the provincial government. Nurul Amin impressed me as an intelligent man who observed things and had some idea of how the administration should be run. Hamidul Haq was known to be a clever man, but there was a general impression that he was standing in the way of development, as he was averse to any Muslim from outside East Pakistan coming into the province and setting up any industry. Discouraged, some who wanted to invest went back to India, others drifted to Karachi. Not, I should add, that it was easy to set up an industry. There was no power, no communications, and even land was difficult to get. I could see that a mental barrier against outsiders was being erected. This proved a great deterrent to the movement of people and capital into East Pakistan. The attitude in West Pakistan was different. There was no emotional or political antipathy to the people coming from India. A large number of Muslim refugees from the United Provinces of India, and from Bombay and other Indian cities, came to West Pakistan after independence, and played a major part in its industrialization. Similarly, in the armed forces and in the civil services there were a number of refugees. At the time of independence there was only one East Pakistani officer in the superior civil services. This necessitated posting officers from West Pakistan, or from amongst the refugees, to the provincial government. They came to be regarded as symbols of outside interference among the educated classes. The new middle class in the province began nursing a grievance against their West Pakistani compatriots. They found themselves lagging behind in respect of positions of authority, in jobs generally, and in commercial fields in particular. The provincial leadership was faced with a difficult situation. They could face the problem squarely, identify the causes, and work to create an adequate social and economic infrastructure, supported by corresponding educational and technical institutions, to prepare the youth of the province to compete with the rest of the country on merit. This required sober thinking and dedicated hard work, neither of which was forthcoming. The alternative was to build up political pressure and shift all the blame to West Pakistan. Some of the political agitators found this a much more convenient and popular course of action. Consequently, the political life of the province was given an agitational pattern, and it worried and saddened me. I could see that some of the political demagogues were going to exploit the emotions of the people. I had a revealing encounter with Suhrawardy at that time, which gave me an insight into his mind. There was a function at Curzon Hall in Dhaka. Someone introduced me to Suhrawardy, and this was the first time I met him. "General," he addressed me with his characteristic flourish, "they have issued an expulsion order, but they do not know that I can finish Nazimuddin in no time." I said, "Mr. Suhrawardy, why don't you leave East Pakistan alone? Haven't they got enough problems without your adding to them?" What he said in reply I cannot repeat because the man is dead, but it gave me sufficient indication of how he intended to exploit the situation in East Pakistan. Since he was a key figure in politics, I knew then that the agitational pressures which were being built up in the province were not going to subside in a hurry. I made a large number of friends among East Pakistanis, and I would talk to them quite frankly. I must say that individually they all agreed with me that little constructive work was being done by the government, and that all energies were getting diverted into political channels. The training of East Pakistani young men for the army was my direct concern. I found that the province was completely lacking in proper educational and training institutions at the higher levels. I was distressed that a population of such a large size should produce so few men of the requisite standard. I took up this matter with the provincial government, and urged them to start good public schools where intelligent young men could be given the necessary training to build their mind, body and character. I made repeated appeals to Khawaja Nazimuddin, and argued at great length with Nurul Amin. They seemed to understand what I was talking about but were unwilling or unable to do any tiling about it. I never quite understood what they were afraid of. Perhaps they thought that general reaction to the establishment of public schools would not be favorable. I remember, for example, that an article was published in Maulana Akram Khan's newspaper Azad condemning the government for planning to start schools for the rich at the expense of the poor. Here were some 40 million Muslims, the greatest Muslim concentration in the world in such a small area, and nothing was being done to create the talent which was required to run a free country. I kept harping on the need for establishing institutions for education and training, but some of the politicians found that they could get better and more immediate dividends by spreading distrust and suspicion among the people. The thing that surprised me was the lack of manpower with qualities of leadership. The Army Selection Board would visit East Pakistan every 6 months. In the beginning, for the first 1 or 2 terms, the board found 4 or 5 boys who could be accepted for the Army Military College, but they were mainly boys who had come from refugee families. When this material was exhausted, they came to selection from amongst the local boys. The selection board would then be lucky to get even 1 or 2 borderline cases. I would advise the board to take them anyway, because nobody would accept that the board had been fair and objective, and that the rules and specifications had been rigidly applied. Something was seriously wrong with the whole educational system. The younger people had to be got hold of, and properly educated, and brought up. Somehow I never got any response from the political leaders of East Pakistan. I used to tell my friends, ask your government to do something or you will be left behind. Go and argue your case. Go and quarrel with West Pakistanis if they are doing something against your interests. Go and fight it out with the central government to get your rights. Do so by all means, but also insist that your young men and women should be properly educated and trained, so that they can discharge their responsibilities as equal citizens as well as anyone else. And do not take the argument too far. After all, human beings are human beings, and if your brethren in West Pakistan start feeling frustrated and unhappy at being constantly subjected to criticism and pressure, you will be doing a very great disservice to the unity of the country. For God's sake, keep your differences and your arguments within the bounds of reason. I could not quite understand whether the agitational pressure in East Pakistan was the result of a combination of little things, such as personal complaints and grievances, or the manifestation of some deeper malady. I often heard criticism of the conduct of West Pakistani civil servants serving in East Pakistan. They were accused of being exclusive and aggressive, and their attitude was regarded as patronizing. I saw many of these officers at work in the province, and I thought they worked very hard, and were deeply interested in the welfare of the province. No doubt their manners and pattern of life were different. An average East Pakistani was inclined to misjudge and misunderstand them. It is quite common for a West Pakistani to answer a simple question with a grunt, and not realize that he is being impolite. An old friend of mine, the late Raja Ghazanfar Ali Khan, was our ambassador in Iran for a long time. The Iranians are a very courteous people, and Raja Sahib must have imbibed their tradition and culture. When he returned to Pakistan, I asked him, "How are you, Raja Sahib?" He said, "Well, I have come home and I expected a certain amount of warmth, but everybody I meet just grunts. You try to find out anything and the response you get is a surly huh." "Raja Sahib, you have certainly been denationalized a bit," I said. "We don't seem to mind these things. It might well be that the mannerisms of the West Pakistani irritated the East Pakistani. I grew to like Bengali songs, though I have no real car for music, they fascinate me. I told an East Pakistani friend once, 'You have such sweet music. I wish to God you were half as sweet yourself.' I found that once you got to know an East Pakistani, he really accepted you without reservation. The trouble in the early days of independence was that there was very little social contact between East and West Pakistanis. The average West Pakistani found himself isolated, and tended to form a group of his own. I would tell the West Pakistanis, 'Why don't you meet them? Ask them over and entertain them, even if it is over a simple cup of tea. You will get to know each other at the human level, and from that, friendship, and warmth, and understanding will develop.' The West Pakistanis were no angels or missionaries. Most of them were government servants who felt that they had been deprived of the comparative comforts of life available to them in West Pakistan. They all came from the middle class and had family commitments. Travel between the two wings of the country was difficult and expensive. Many used to be irritated by what they regarded as the general inefficiency of East Pakistan, and never tried to make a secret of their unwillingness to serve there. It was a peculiar phenomenon, that while an average East Pakistani in Dhaka thought that the West Pakistan officials were a manifestation of some kind of colonialism, the West Pakistanis were the most unwilling and unhappy instruments of that imaginary domination. I remember telling someone in fun, "Why don't you start a little agitation against me and throw me out too? You know I will not resist a bit." Now many more amenities are available, both in the army and on the Aral side. And for the people, today's life bears no comparison to what it was like at the time of independence. For many then there were few arrangements for education, no accommodation, no sanitation, but eventually even those who went under compulsion developed a great fondness for East Pakistan, and many of them look back on their service there with a feeling of nostalgia. Returning to army life in those days, I kept myself very busy, touring every district and subdivision, identifying likely routes of invasion, and preparing a defense plan for the province. I was also worried about the internal law and order situation. Very little was being done to redress the grievances of the police force, and I knew that I did not have enough strength to deal with any large-scale disturbances. The police force, about 600,000 men, consisted of all kind of heterogeneous elements. Some had come from the police service in West Bengal. They were not very well disciplined, and even the senior officers were not all that good. The politicians never took quick decisions about the requirements of the civil armed forces, and the result was a feeling of acute discontent and inefficiency. Trouble was brewing and finally broke out in Dhaka on July 13, 1948. I was on tour with Zakir Hussain, who was then Inspector General of Police. We were staring at a rest house in Mymensingh, when I was rung up from Dhaka, and told that the police had surrounded Government House and the Chief Minister's house. Some of them had been seen in front of the Civil Secretariat. They had removed arms and ammunition from a magazine in the police lines, and had taken up defensive positions. It was a peculiar situation. On the one hand I had to pacify the head of the police whose guest I was, and on the other, deal with his mutineers. I told the battalion commander to give them a warning, and prevent them from adopting a reckless course. The argument went on for hours, but the police could not be persuaded to return to their lines. After some time the battalion commander rang me back to say that the mutineers were not responding to reason. Whenever an appeal was made to them they would start abusing the army. We were left with no option but to take action. I told the battalion commander to take military action against the mutineers, using as little force as possible. The defensive position which the police force had taken up was in the middle of the city, and there was danger of members of the public getting injured by covering fire. We had no alternative but to attack the mutineers. A company of 3rd 8th Punjab Regiment was detailed to deal with the situation. They had to cover some 300 yards of open ground to get onto the defensive position. They advanced quickly and occupied the position. 1 or 2 policemen including the ringleader were killed and 10 or 12 persons were injured. Luckily the trouble was quelled, the situation brought under control, and the chances of it spreading to the rest of the province were eliminated. On another occasion too, I had to act in aid of the civil power. I was called by Khawaja Nazimuddin, the chief minister, who told me that he had a precarious majority of 4 in the assembly. He was worried that he would soon lose support as Fazlul Haq had mobilized the students who were intimidating his followers. He wanted me to prevent the students from attacking the assembly hall. I should have declined to intervene as it was essentially a task for the police, but I was worried that if there was a breakdown of the government, it might lead to widespread agitation and lawlessness. So I deputed an infantry company under Major Pirzada to be available to the police force near the assembly hall should the need arise. The session opened, and inside the house the chief minister embarked on his speech, which he had described to me as very important. Outside the students were crying blue murder. Fazlul Haq knew his stuff. He would pop out of the hall every now and then, and give a fresh slogan to the students which they would go on chanting. This went on till about 5 o'clock in the evening, when I got a message that the students were getting very close to the troops, and that there was danger of a clash. It was winter and beginning to get dark. I was worried that if the students rushed the troops they would have to open fire, and this I wanted to avoid at all cost. I decided to go to the assembly. I had never seen such confusion. The chief minister was haranguing an angry and violent house, while outside the students were having the time of their life. Ubaidullah was the superintendent of police on duty. I asked him, "Why don't you take some action and keep these boys away?" He said, "Sir, if you order me I will take action, but I am not going to do anything for these politicians." I was shocked and asked why. He explained that they would order him to disperse the students, and the next day hold an inquiry and put the whole blame on him. They would never take responsibility. "I want an order in writing," he insisted. The morale of the police force was obviously pretty low. I went into the assembly and got in touch with the chief minister. I told him that it was getting dark and the boys were already too close to my men. "What shall I do?" he asked me. "Disperse the house and go home," I advised. "How can I do that? He remonstrated quite seriously. "I am right in the middle of a very important speech." He must have seen the look of amusement on my face and decided, "All right, give me 5 minutes." He went into the house, spoke to someone and returned. "Well, I am ready to go home, but how do I get out of here?" I asked Major Pirzada to bring the Chief Minister's car to the back of the Assembly Hall. Together we smuggled the Chief Minister out through the kitchen. Having accomplished that feat, I came out and told the boys, "The bird has flown!" They roared with laughter, and the whole scene, which a moment ago had looked tense and pregnant with danger, assumed a jovial color. Fazlul Haq came out along with Muhammad Ali of Bogra, who was then in the opposition, and they tried to work up the boys again. I tapped Muhammad Ali on the shoulder and said, "Are you looking for a bullet?" He retorted, "You are being rude." I did not want the trouble to restart, so I told him firmly to go home. Muhammad Ali controlled 5 votes in the assembly. He immediately went to the Chief Minister and threatened to withdraw his support. The Chief Minister summoned me, and after thanking me for saving the situation, told me that I had annoyed Muhammad Ali and this would cost him his government. I suggested that he might call him, so that I could explain the position to him. When Muhammad Ali came, I embraced him and said, "I was only pulling your leg. You should not have taken it seriously." I was fed up and did not want to get involved any further in their internal wrangle. Muhammad Ali felt pacified and we parted as friends. Meanwhile, I was looking for a place to set up the divisional headquarters. Dhaka just did not have any suitable accommodation. I saw the High Court building, but it was not easy to suggest to the High Court authorities that they should let us have a part of the building. The Chief Justice, Mr. Muhammad Akram, however, was a man of great understanding. Some of his judges used to sit in tents, but they were kind enough to let us have the accommodation we required. I remember one day I was coming back to the High Court after an inspection. I found Fazlul Haq asking the students to lie flat on the ground to prevent the working of the court. I looked out of my car and asked what it was all about. Fazlul Haq saw me and apparently decided that I looked dangerous. He quietly advised the boys to clear out. I must say life was not without its moments of excitement, and even amusement in those days. Before I left the province, I was able to build up an adequate Ansar force. In this I received great support from Aziz Ahmed, who was then Chief Secretary of the provincial government. He felt that such a force would bring discipline to the masses, and persuaded the provincial government to spare resources for it. The East Bengal Regiment also came into existence in my time. It was the first time that people from this part had been enlisted in a combatant unit. I was also able to establish the East Pakistan Rifles, a police force, and initiate a system of giving all police officers battle training. It did the force an immense amount of good, and they developed tremendous confidence and pride in themselves. I left East Pakistan toward the end of November 1949. With a heavy heart. I had grown very fond of the people, and developed some understanding of the problems of the area, which stood me in good stead later. From East Pakistan, I was recalled to General Headquarters at Rawalpindi. General Gracie was Commander-in-Chief at that time, and General Ross Mackay was his Chief of Staff. I was appointed Adjutant General. The Adjutant General's branch dealt with the maintenance of personnel, recruitment of officers and men, medical facilities, salaries and pensions, and discipline. One of the first problems that I had to face was with regard to the Azad Kashmir forces. The fighting in Kashmir had ended in a ceasefire. The Azad forces needed to be put on a regular footing and brought under some military code of discipline. There were some 50,000 men under arms, of varying military quality, and no army act was applicable to them. A great deal of correspondence on this subject had been going on between GHQ and the Azad Kashmir government. There was a gentleman called Shah, who was head of the Azad Kashmir government, and who had some connection with the state forces. He was deaf and used to carry with him an impressive hearing aid. He had been insisting that the Azad forces be governed by the British Army Act, and he based his argument on the fact that whenever state forces were employed by the British, they came under the British Army Act, and not the Indian Army Act. I was furious when I heard this and thought I should talk to the man. I told him that the British had gone and taken the code with them. We had only one code, the Pakistan Army Act, and it would be conducive to better discipline if this act was applied to the Azad forces also. I noticed that whenever he did not want to hear anything, Shah would quietly disengage the hearing aid. I spent a long time with him but could not get any answer from him. Whenever I asked him whether he agreed, he would put up a blank appearance pretending not to have heard anything. However, in the end, the Azad forces agreed to be governed by Pakistan Army Code. Gracie was a very kind man. He was extremely considerate, and allowed me a great deal of freedom. Ross Mackay was a meticulous staff officer with a brilliant military record, and I found his advice in staff matters extremely helpful. He was a sound, sober and stable officer. The Army had no pay or pension code, and all the perquisites available in the Army for long and meritorious service had been taken away by the government. No honorary commissions could be given, nor any monetary awards made to men in the ranks. I started an arduous battle with the Ministry of Finance, and it took me nearly 7 years to resolve some of these problems. I would take a proposal to finance and my only request would be, please say yes or no, but please do say something. It was like battering one's head against a wall of enigmatic silence. It was not always easy to get to the top people who were apparently busy building silent walls of their own. One had to be content with smaller walls like deputy financial advisors. It seemed that everything had been left to people at that level, and they were as impervious to reasoning as they were insensitive to the urgency of requirements. I thought Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, who was then the Secretary General to the government of Pakistan, would lend a hand in resolving our difficulties. He knew something about the Army, having served as financial advisor, military finance, in pre-independence days. I did not come into direct contact with him much, but, to the best of my knowledge, he never lifted his little finger to help resolve our problems. The Pakistan Army was in truth being held together by precious little. We used to feel in GHQ that in a situation of real crisis we would find ourselves hopelessly handicapped. I kept reminding the government at Karachi that it was not a healthy state of affairs. A man who one day might be called upon to give his life for the country must have some sense of security. At least his conditions of service should be settled. Unless this was done, he could not devote himself wholeheartedly to his profession. Apart from this, there was need for clear-cut decisions in important policy matters affecting the future of the Army, without which we could not even begin to organize ourselves. We had inherited a wartime force, comprising excellent fighting material, but imperfectly trained. A large number of officers had been recruited against short-term emergency commissions, and they were poorly trained, and had no concept of serving in a peacetime army. We had no complete Muslim unit. The British used to regard the Muslims as a dangerous dement, and had scattered them through different units. The result was that most of the men did not know one another, and the units were still lacking in esprit de corps, thus adding to the general problem of indiscipline. I must confess that I adopted some rough and ready methods to deal with this problem. The news travelled fast through the Army that I was inclined to deal with men at the physical level. It had a sobering effect. The indiscipline among officers required more drastic treatment, and I felt that I would not be able to carry the Commander-in-Chief with me, so I decided to postpone this operation till some more propitious occasion. I started an officers' training school, and also went into the working of the military academy. The future of the Army depended on our establishing sound training institutions, which could produce regular officers with a sense of discipline and devotion, according to peacetime requirements. I served as Adjutant General for about a year. The experience was most valuable because it brought me face to face with basic problems of overall Army organization. It also gave me an opportunity to see the working of the central government, at least in the financial sphere, at first hand. Notwithstanding all the deficiencies and difficulties, I had one satisfaction: we had a young army, and first-class human material. God had given us a magnificent opportunity to organize an army of our own, in the service of our country. And we did.